Welcome to the Compliance Experts podcast, hosted by Vartan Consultancy. Miles Vartan and his guests, as experts in compliance and risk management, will guide you carefully and with clarity through the many sectors of compliance like health and safety, ISO and operator licenses, and the complexity of customs regulations. They'll also be talking about the latest legislation, global trade news, and the hot topics as they happen.
So, welcome to episode 3 of the Compliance Experts. We're here in Felixstowe today, and I've got the pleasure and also the challenge to have a fantastic guest with me today, Laura Thomas. For those who don't know Laura's currently Legal and QHSE Director at Jackson Civil Engineering, based in Ipswich, accountable for quality, health, safety, environment. She acts as an in-house lawyer and a troubleshooter, solving legal issues, and an advisor to the business on risk and compliance. Before we get Laura on the line, I met Laura in 2009, the second week of my business when I set up the company. I was advised that Laura would be exactly the person I should speak to, as we were specialising pretty much solely then on health and safety, and met Laura for a cup of coffee in Ipswich and got some fantastic advice. So Laura, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Miles. Thank you for inviting me on. And thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure I recognise myself, but it's lovely to be talking to you. And as I said, it's great that I was there at the start of your journey. And look how amazing it all is now. So
it has been quite a journey. The first question I asked Laura is pretty much, what should I do? And Laura looked at me rather quizzically, thinking, what should she say? So she said, Miles, in the event of an accident, here's a list of what I would be asking you for. And that was a great way for me to understand about how to manage risk. But today, Laura and I are going to talk about how we're going to get people back to the office and all the issues around welfare and mental health, or some of the issues relating to mental health and welfare in terms of that issue. We've entitled the episode at last, Back to the Office. So just to give a little bit of background to our listeners, and thank you for joining us today. You can imagine the scene. You're at work, and the company want to get back to the levels of productivity, maybe pre-COVID, or some of which have been got to during COVID, and they want to get some consistency into the business. You've got the usual pressures on you to do this at a lower cost, and of course you've got to make sure that you're looking after everybody's welfare and physically that they're not going to get hurt. It's all fairly standard stuff. But how are you going to achieve this when, if you're lucky, you may have spoken to your teams once a week on Zoom or on Teams, and in many cases you might not have seen them in person. You're listening to reports across all media outlets that your team will be back to work on the 19th of July, so possibly are surprised and confused at the Prime Minister's last press conference on the 12th of July, which included return to the office guidance, and it is actually anything but clear. So just to quote what was said, employers have been told not to instruct their workers to return to the office en masse next week, despite the government lifting the official work from home order. Businesses are instead being asked to stagger office returns throughout the summer, with the Prime Minister stressing that he expects a gradual transition back to the working practices seen before the pandemic. At Vartan, we've been partially in the office and partially working from home. So we're going to be doing a gradual return to work before we get everybody back in the office, making sure that even though as of next week we will all be double jabbed, that with our risk assessments being updated, and we have a nice office here with a meeting room, but if we're going to have meetings, we're going to do it out in the open plan section of the office and take it from there, because we have to run our businesses. Now, Laura, getting ready for this episode, I went on to the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development websites and looked at various surveys going back from March 2020 right through to April 2021. And I know I was on a webinar with yourself that you did at Jackson, where Dr. Tim Smith was a guest. How are you how are the board at Jackson's, and how are you tackling or starting to think about these issues yourself?
Yeah, so you're right, Miles. We at Jackson have always actually focused heavily on mental health and wellbeing. But for Mental Health Awareness Week, we ran some particular sessions, one with a leading safety behavioural psychologist, Dr. Tim Marsh, because we recognise at Jackson that having happy, well people it is great for business. And so we are dedicated to supporting that. At the moment, obviously, we are now looking to forward to the 19th of July. And rather like you, we have had a sort of bubble system until this date where we've had 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office, and it's been rotating. And we've had very strict COVID controls within the offices, tag systems for using kitchens and toilets, one-way system, etc. And we, come next week, have actually decided not to relax that too much at all, actually, because whilst the government has obviously changed, sort of opened up the doors, so to speak, and there is still some really strong guidance there in the background about what we should be doing to protect our people in respect of COVID. And linking to the mental health piece, we're very conscious that it's not just people's physical health that we need to be looking at in respect of COVID. It's also people's mental health. And we acknowledge that there will be some anxiety for some people, potentially, in feeling that the floodgates are now open to some extent. And so we want to support our people in returning to the office safely. And by that, we don't just mean physical safety, we mean mental health and well-being as well. So we're taking a quite cautious approach along the lines of the bubbles that we've already been using. So we've sent out a bulletin today, in fact, to all employees, both site staff and head office, because you'll appreciate we have quite differences in approach on sites and head office. The sites have been continuing throughout the pandemic. And what we're saying to our people is, you might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable, you might be feeling a little bit anxious, and we want you to put yourselves first. And so we're taking a bit of a cautious approach here, and we'd like you to continue with many of the COVID mitigations that we've had in place throughout. And so we feel that doing it gradually and slowly and gently is the best way for our people, both from a physical and a mental health perspective.
So in terms of when you talk about we, Laura, is that maybe a managing board or a project team that have been put together to do this? Or
yeah, we have lots of different layers actually in Jackson. It's a very good question, Miles. So obviously we have a board, like any business. We then have a number of directors as well. So we have a directors sort of board, so to speak. And we have a COVID task force. And that the task force has been meeting throughout the pandemic to look at the data, look at the evidence, and make some recommendations for the board as regards how we should approach COVID. So we've taken a multi-layered approach. Obviously, I work very closely with our head of HR and training, Claire Chatterton, and she and I, along with the board, have perhaps been sort of leading the approach, but it's very much a multidisciplinary look at this, because whilst it is a health issue, it's an issue that affects everybody.
I mean, I was getting ready for this morning and looking at some of the feedback which you gave me prior to the session in terms of, I wrote down managing their way. Many employees have been working more than ever during lockdown, you wrote. And I added to them managing their way through combining home, schooling in many cases, work, and even getting to walk the dog.
Absolutely.
So we've now got this. In your case, I think a Springer Spaniel looking at you regularly, going, "Okay, Mum, when are we getting out?" So
yeah, and in fact, she was just outside the door, threatening to disrupt this podcast. So you're spot on there, Miles. Absolutely spot on.
Now, prior to working from home, you would have had to go up extra special in the morning to walk the dog, and you would have come to work. You would have been plying your way through your things to do and cases, and possibly having to go to court and interviewing clients, looking at health and safety issues. So in terms of the task force that you set up at Jackson's, many people would call them line managers, so managing the off-site projects, or actually, because you've got many divisions within Jackson's, all who have got to perform and report back on their objectives. And how has the task force included those people? Now, maybe just before you answer that question, I spoke to a very large facilities management business locally in East Anglia recently, and I asked him exactly the same question. He said to me, well, it's dead simple, Miles. We just told all our line managers that they had to speak to their staff twice a week to make sure they were okay. And what was the feedback from that, Ian? And he said, a bit shocking, really. He said, there was I, as chief executive of the business, assuming that my line managers spoke to their employees. And in many cases, we discovered that they never spoke to their employees. So to all of a sudden, for me to insist that they spoke to them twice a week was quite a challenge. And even when they had those conversations, it was what subjects were they going to talk about? And it was pretty apparent to him that his line managers knew very little about the people who worked for them, apart from, undertaking a task. So very few of his line managers knew about many of the issues that his staff were bringing into work, and which was affecting their mindset, which was affecting their productivity. And he then quickly realised that actually there was nowhere for these people to go to discuss these issues at work. So there were many elephants in the room that had never been tackled, never been addressed.
Well, great that they are now, though. Hey, I mean, listening to that, I mean, I think we're very fortunate at Jackson because we are very much so an inclusive business. We have a culture where people aren't afraid to talk, aren't afraid to feedback, very friendly business, and so interactions we have with people are frequent. That's pre-pandemic and during pandemic. I actually joined Jackson during the pandemic, so it's quite interesting just to see that approach from quite an objective standpoint and be able to say, oh yeah, actually this is a business that really cares. We have a behavioural framework at Jackson, one of which is we care. For me, that is just vital. I mean, I can't underline it enough. And with all of this, as you say, frequent communication, quality communication, valuable communication. You were in the same session as me, Miles, with Dr. Tim Marsh. And the real takeaway I got from that is ask people how they are, but expect that the first time you ask them, they're probably not going to answer you truthfully. You then need to spend some time talking to them, finding out what they like, talking to them about, the football, dare I say it, or whatever it is that interests them. Then ask them the question again, how are you? And it's only when you have actually taken the time to invest in the people and understand what makes them tick that you're actually going to get a truthful, honest answer from them, because it's that culture of caring. And so for me, if something good has come from this pandemic, that actually businesses are really starting to understand the importance of that, for me, that is absolutely brilliant, because I've always worked in businesses, I'm fortunate to say, that do care and do take that time to understand their people and speak to their people. I mean, I know for my team, I've got a team of QHSE advisors, environmental managers, quality managers, and we speak regularly as a team, every 2 weeks as a team, but every day on some level or other. I know about everybody. I know about their families. I know what they like. I know what they do at the weekend. And it's only really if you have that personal investment in people that I think you can get the best from them. Because as I said, I repeat myself, but it's so important. It's that culture of trust and care. Yeah. And I think just added to that, we do a lot at Jackson around the mental health piece as well. And one of our objectives for this year is that 25% of our workforce are going to be mental health first aid trained.
Right.
And we've already reached that because, as I said, we see the people as the whole self. It's not just the bit you bring to work. You bring your whole self to work. And we also recognise that because of this pandemic, more people are struggling with ill mental health, and we need to be able to understand a bit more about that, and recognise how to signpost people, where to signpost people, and support people. So, as I said, I'm really proud of that. I think 25% of our workforce being mental health first aiders, and that's across the business. So that's from foreman to the QHSE team through to the board. We've got a real cross section of people.
So during their training, Laura, as becoming a mental health first aider, what part through the course, how to digest, handle and respond to information that maybe you aren't particularly used to receiving? So if someone says, I've got problems at home, I've got financial problems, I've got a dependency problem, I'm not sleeping, I'm up in front of the traffic commissioner next week. Now, those who don't know Laura well may not know that she was a traffic commissioner, a deputy traffic commissioner at the time. Yeah. So we would have called you Mom, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So,
yes.
So you're going to see Laura Thomas as or the traffic commissioner, and you're under stress, and you and this is during the pandemic, and so within this course, Laura, is there training given to that in terms of on the syllabus, in terms of how you manage that information?
Yeah, it's a really, I tell you what, I did it about a month ago, and I think it's one of the most valuable training courses I have done that I can remember, actually. And it was hard at times, because it covers some really serious topics, but so valuable. And what it does is it really teaches you to listen. It's all about listening. As a mental health first aider, you're not there to solve someone's problems. You're there to listen to them. Listen and signpost. And one thing I learned about myself, actually, it's very good because every day's a school day for me. It's always good to learn more about yourself. And obviously in my career, Miles, as you know, I've done a lot of talking, an awful lot of talking. And I realised that actually my listening skills needed a bit of development. I needed to listen more carefully and listen intently and let people finish what they're saying and take a breath before you come in with a response. Because I think I've sort of grown up in a profession where I always have to have the answers. So I should be on the front foot and always giving those answers. And so for me, it was a hugely valuable exercise in learning how to properly listen.
Yeah. And is it a 1 day course, a 2 day course?
I did the 2 day course. You can do it in 2 full days, or I think you can do it in 4 mornings. Right. As I said, once I had done the course, I now actively encourage anybody who's vaguely interested to do it, because as I said, I found it one of the most valuable training courses I think I've ever done. And it's not about treating, as I said, it's about signposting. So it's about telling people where they can go for help. So obviously at Jackson, and I'm sure in many businesses, we've got an employee assistance scheme where you can have access to trained counsellors on a confidential basis. And it might be that you signpost people there, or it might be in a more serious case that you might signpost somebody to their GP. But it's, as I said, it's about listening and signposting rather than treating. But actually for me, it's also about learning about mental health and learning about how it impacts people. And that was the really tough bit for me. I learnt a huge amount, and as I said, it was tough at times, but goodness me, in a really good way.
Well, I have a friend who works for Relate, the counselling organisation, and they'll set up a session, and you sit in a room, and you have to sit somebody opposite you do not know. Yeah. And the person running the course will say, right, you have a minute to introduce yourself to the person sitting opposite you. And there's a lot of noise, and a minute goes by, and a bell goes, and you swap, and the other person then has a minute to introduce themselves. And then he says to them with a wry smile on his face, right, now the first person will speak again, but he's going to talk back to you and tell you what you said to him. And pretty much in 2 minutes' time, people realise that they don't listen. Yeah. So they don't actively listen. And I think I've seen this in my own family with my 3 kids. how much do you actually listen to your partner? How much do you listen to your kids? How much do you actually ask them questions? How many times do you ask them questions in an open way, rather than providing them with the answer that they're going to give you?
It's so funny you should say that, Miles, because interestingly, after I'd done my I think it was after day one, I had a real guilt complex because I thought, oh my goodness, my 10-year-old wanted to tell me something this morning and I didn't listen to him properly. And it's so funny you should say that, because actually these are skills you take into the rest of your life, aren't they?
You do. And you've got a team. You've got a team. Many people have teams or groups of people that they have to work for. I am a Manchester City fan, but I follow Ipswich Town as well. And during the darker days at Ipswich Town, Mick McCarthy was appointed as manager. And I went to a breakfast at Portman Road. He was only about 3 or 4 weeks into his term there. It was a packed room. They were nailed on relegation candidates as before he arrived. And he said, he described his first couple of days at Portman Road. He'd gone to the Trading Academy near Humberducy Lane, and he told everybody to be there at 10 o'clock. So they all turned up somewhere between 10 to 10 and 10:15. Many cars hadn't been washed. Some people hadn't particularly smartened themselves up. A couple of people had. And he said, okay, well, that's not a good start, he said. I asked you all to be here at 10 o'clock. Some observations. He said, most of you have come into the room and you've just sat down. You haven't even gone up to your colleagues and asked them how they are, going back to what Dr. Tim Smith said to us. He said, so you're sitting here and you're expecting to play well as a team, and yet you're not communicating with each other at all. He said, this isn't going to happen, but I did spend some time as a manager in Lyon in France. Not only did everybody have to turn up on time, but when they walked into the room, as you might expect being in France, they would go and kiss each other and ask each other how they were. Yeah. He said the look on these guys' faces, I don't think in construction businesses in Ipswich or maybe down at Sizewell C, when they're going to be laying tarmac, or you're going to get highly skilled nuclear engineers, there won't be a lot of that type of fraternity going on. But I bet you that the vast majority of companies will listen to these types of conversations, but not actually seriously apply them to work, possibly because they don't understand how it needs to be prioritized in this way, or aren't able to give it the time. And no one can say that there isn't lots of information out there and discussions about this. But I think in a proactive way, I think interested parties and stakeholders need to be providing help to businesses, and mental health first aiders being just a brick in the wall.
Absolutely. So,
coming up with job descriptions for line managers, going right down to, I'm very interested in ISO 45001, and although we've got the same 10 sections in quality management and the environment management system, in leadership, in 45001, it talks about leadership and worker participation. So you will have found, Laura, when you've been defending a serious health and safety accident, in many cases, that you've got to present a picture to the judge which is going to have to steer him or her away from the fact that there wasn't a lot of worker participation going on. There may have been documents written and safe systems of work stuck on the wall, but no one was ever taken through them. And in fact, there was very few, maybe very little input from the workers in terms of how their managers were going to keep them safe. So if you're asking people to come to work for you, and you can't even do that, with all respect to everybody who's listening, because I know this isn't an easy subject to get your head around, but no. But if you can involve your staff, your workers, in every aspect of your business, which will include well-being, then I think that there have been some great examples in the past. I used to work for Russell Davis way back in the midst of time. So Glyn Davis and Ron Davis and John Williams, they not only knew the name of each driver of each truck, but they knew the names of the wives, they knew the names of the kids.
Absolutely. John Williams still does that nowadays.
They'd often been at their weddings. They invested their time in their staff, and I got an awful lot out of it.
Yeah.
So I think there are an awful lot of benefits, and going beyond using the pandemic as a motivation for doing it. So there has to be a real positive motivation for investing your time in your staff,
in your people,
to help them, to help their well-being and help their mental health, and you'll get happier staff, more productive staff, and you'll get them sitting in the pub talking to their mates or at a barbecue saying, "Do you know what? Jackson really look after me." And it will keep you. It will help you retain your staff as well.
Well, I agree, absolutely, and totally agree with everything you said, actually. And as I said, I know John Williams, and he still does exactly the same now. And I'm also proud, actually, at Jackson, our CEO, Richard Neal, who I'm sure you know, is exactly the same. He knows everybody, as does our MD, Brian Crofton. And it's lovely. And one thing I always try and do whenever I go out to site, it's quite funny, actually. We had a half yearly this week, and I was on the gate, which I quite like doing because that means I get to see everyone coming in. So I was doing temperature checks and hand sanitisation on the gate, and I asked one of our foremen to stand with me because I said to him, I want to know the names of everybody arriving, and I don't know them because I'm still quite new to the business. So can you tell me so that I can address them by their name? Because that sort of thing makes such a difference. People then think, oh, actually, this person's taken the time to understand who I am. I will then, then in the course of the event, go and chat to them, ask about how long. I mean, the one thing at Jackson is we have people who've worked at Jackson for years and years and years and years and years. I mean, it's absolutely that sort of business. But it's because we invest in people. And as you say, in this current market where actually because of COVID, the job world has opened up, particularly when we're looking at office-based roles, people can now work remotely. People don't have to work locally so much, can be sitting in your study in Woodbridge and working for a business in London. So in order to keep our people, we do need to go that extra mile. And for me, that is investing in their well-being, understanding them as people. And again, I go back to that listening point. But also, I think there's another tangible benefit that we should chat about, Miles, which is the one that Dr. Tim Marsh spoke about in his session to us, because he's made the link between well-being and mental health and incidents. And I think that's an important one for some businesses to think about, because actually if this mental health well-being discussion is maybe not so comfortable for some businesses, which I totally get, actually there has been a lot of study to show that if you have somebody who is suffering with ill mental health, the chances of them having an incident are greater, according to Dr. Tim Marsh. And I think that's a really tangible way to look at this as well, because we want to keep our people safe. And in doing so, we can't just look at their physical safety. We also have to look at the whole self that they bring to work. And so part of that, and something we're doing at Jackson as well, is looking at the physical causes in the workplace of ill mental health. So one thing we're looking at this year is we're reviewing and refreshing our fatigue policy. An important thing. I mean, in the transport world, Miles, we all know that the government have now relaxed drivers' hours rules. Do we think that's the right thing? I don't know. I'm not going to necessarily say what my view is, but I think it's a question.
I was going to say, Laura, yes. I don't know if I was a judge and you were standing in front of me, if I was able to come up with the appropriate question there, but I know exactly what you think about it. I mean, I think personally, I think it's really not. I think it's just the wrong thing to do. We've got a shortage of drivers. It's the subject at the moment.
Absolutely.
As well as shortage of people working in healthcare, in the supermarkets, etc. But
we're
100,000. We're 100,000 drivers, LGV, large goods vehicle drivers, short at the moment. For a while, since for those that are not aware, but lorry drivers used to retire at 65, the same as everybody else. But now, when that bar was removed, and you can effectively have to have a mutual agreement with your employer as to when you do retire, you're getting people driving into their 70s, and they're having to do their 59 hours and 45 minutes to make up their pay, to bolster their pensions. But they're having to get up at 2-3 in the morning to get out on the roads, which is quite a pleasant experience this time of year. But when it's sub-zero temperatures and heaving down with rain and middle of winter. And the big issue, if you're a lorry driver, for those who haven't had the pleasure of being one, they follow their vocational professional route in terms of employment, is you arrive at the service station or you arrive at the so-called secure parking area. And often the standard of the facilities that they're presented with are disgraceful. So for 20 odd pounds or something, you can get access to the shower facilities and this type of thing. But it's not something that you would accept at home. And it does nothing in terms of encouraging people to come into the industry.
It's really sad to hear, isn't it? I mean, it's just awful because I certainly, when I worked in the legal world with a lot of transport businesses, and also as a deputy traffic commissioner, I used to say to drivers, you are professionals. Yes. You are valued professionals, and that they should be treated as such. I find it really, really disappointing to hear things like that. It's I think let's look back to well-being. How is that supporting these valued professionals' well-being?
Exactly. So you're having to stay away from home in many cases because that's just in terms of driver's hours and the rest that you have to have, the rest periods you have to have. You can't simply drive through the night and come home. So you have to stay in your cab. You stay in your cab. Often you're away for 2 or 3 nights a week. You're not getting home to your family. Your safe place is your vehicle, which is, you can often stand up in these things now. So you're full height without having to worry about that. You've got lots of cooking facilities in there. You've got air conditioning. You've got cab heaters.
Some of them are amazing, aren't they?
Some of them are amazing.
However, doing some
exactly. But you do have to go and use the facilities, and I think that there's many aspects of that role where, they're talking now about increasing pay by hundreds of % to try and encourage people to join the industry. But I think there's so companies like Jackson, major businesses, small businesses need to think about: are you able to offer healthcare? Are you able to offer counselling? Are you genuinely able to provide someone with a safe place to go if they've got a problem? Can they come and talk to you? And talk to you confidentially. Now, the definition of confidence, talking to somebody in confidence, is quite a difficult thing. And that person you're speaking to is often going to go and have to ask for advice.
It's certainly in Jackson, that is the role of our mental health first aiders. So what we do is we have stickers for our hard hats. So if someone's a mental health first aider, it's clear from their hard hat. We have our signature banners in emails have that we're mental health first aiders. So we're trying to make people readily identifiable. And then, as I said, the idea is that our mental health first aiders will then point people in the right direction for support. But another thing we're doing as well on that is we have a mental health committee that's just been formed. And the idea is that mental health committee, again, it was quite interesting, actually, because we asked for expressions of interest for the mental health committee, the sustainability committee, and the health and safety committees. And the one that we got most interested in was the mental health committee. So that for me is interesting. And as I said, I think it underlines my view at the minute that not because of COVID, but COVID has perhaps prompted a bit of a, dare I say it, mental health pandemic, actually. And so, we've got a mental health committee that we're forming that's going to really actively look at this. How can we really support our people? And what do we think are good ways to reach out to those who, as you say, sometimes might not always feel that they want to speak to people or can speak to people? But our clear message is, please do. do speak to people. In the construction industry, the figures are awful as regards suicide. It's a real issue. And so that's why we're investing so much in really helping people to understand that we care, and there are a number of different ways that we can help. But I think you can do that in any business, Miles, don't you? I mean, I think it's just, as I said, creating that culture of caring and openness.
I think it comes back to values. So you've got values, and you often hear people put their colleagues to shame when they can actually spiel off what the company's values are. But for me, and I think certain individuals and maybe a lot of politicians have not come out with bright lights during the pandemic in terms of honesty, and because of political reasons. I mean, I sometimes feel for politicians from all parties, how early do they have to go up in the morning to be briefed as to what the answers are going to be to whatever question they're given? And whatever question they're given, you're not going to answer the question, but you're just going to spiel out this response. The pressure they must be under as individuals in terms of their own mental health. But then I heard, and I cannot remember the name of the minister involved, but the answer to the question was, I think we've got to be truthful about this. And my immediate response was, how often are you not truthful? And these people are setting examples for us, for the top of society. So we have to, in businesses, I think we have to, honesty and integrity has to be a major thing. Totally. We're at Vartan Consultancy. This year, we're going to be doing, for the first time, we're going to be doing 360-degree feedback.
Yes, great. Yeah.
And I've spoken to a business leader, major business leader in Suffolk, and who has to stand up in front of the city. And so he goes to speak to shareholders, potential shareholders, investors, as their results are brought out twice a year. And he said to me, Mars, he said, I can do that in my sleep. But the day that I fear the most are the 2 days in the year I open up this beige envelope on my desk to find out what the results have been in 360-degree feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how well I have actually been adhering to our principles on a day-to-day basis. And I think if you're brave enough to do that, you're motivated then to stick to what you know is the right thing to do. So if everybody in your business knows that you are honest, you have integrity, you are a caring person who respects others, I think mental health then fits, and looking after other people's mental health fits very nicely, if I can use that term, within that context. So we've got to try. I think we've got to encourage businesses to be truthful to themselves, be very clear on what the company's values are, and actually, on a daily basis, follow them. So that, because the moment you don't, you imagine you pretty much immediately lose credibility, don't you?
It's interesting. Something I used to say at Jackson a lot was, say what you do what you say, and then have the paperwork to prove it. Because you'll probably remember that, Miles.
Yes, I do.
Because there was a time where health and safety was all about paperwork, and we were trying to dispel that myth. It's not about paperwork. It's actually about saying what you do and then doing what you say. It's walk the walk, talk the talk is another good phrase that Dr. Tim Marsh uses as well. And it's something that actually we're developing in a QHSE leadership program at Jackson, because it's all about integrity. And the one time that you say something but then do the opposite, or you walk on by, or you pay lip service to something, is the time when you've lost your people. And I think that's a good example of that. And I think that's the case. I mean, in leadership roles, I think we all have that slight worry. We try and do our best. But as you say, that brown envelope arriving and have we done our best is a really important moment, actually. And I think I totally agree, because it's how you impact people that's important. You might have the best of intentions, but how it lands could be quite different. So, yeah.
Exactly. So to give our listeners a takeaway from this session, Laura, in terms of trying to, maybe in many cases, being at the bottom of the stairs and trying to reach the first landing in terms of making improvements on this subject with your business, and thereby protecting your people, and keeping them safe.
Yeah.
You've got to, I think what I would be suggesting to people is that you've got to take a bit of a temperature check within the business, haven't you? And establish where you are against these various key aspects and share those with your staff. Because unless you know where you are,
absolutely,
you could fly off in a certain direction and go and buy Dr. Tim Marsh's book and go, right, I've cracked it.
Yeah.
But unless that isn't actually in context with your business.
Totally.
So would you sort of encourage doing some sort of health check almost on the business?
Absolutely. I think asking your people.
Mm-hmm.
There's an awful lot of value in asking your people. And if there's, you can even do it confidentially. Send something, a confidential survey round. How are you feeling? Just really try and get that feedback from people. Because as you say, it's kind of all about listening. Set up forums where people can have their say, encourage people to have their say. And as you say, that will give you a real good temperature check of where you are as a business. But I think on a personal level, and this is something that we can all do, and I now do religiously, is what I said, is the asking someone how they are, having a chat about whatever it is that interests them, the weather, whatever that might be, putting people at ease and then asking them again. And so for me, the key take home is ask, how are you? And then ask again. And it's amazing, I think, the impact that will have.
Totally agree with you. So not only were you a pioneer in being one of the first females in your field in terms of Crown Courts and New Scotland Yard and the Solicitor's Office and traffic commissioners, you're now going to be a pioneer in terms of improving mental health.
I'd love that. So, I would love that, Miles, if I could be. But
it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Miles. It's been lovely.
So for all those listening, we'd like to thank Laura. But if any of you have got any views on this subject, please let us know. You can come to our usual social media channels. Please go to vartonconsultancy.com. There's a contact page. You can drop us a line. We'll get back to you. If there's any subjects maybe relating to this that you'd like us to follow up with in future podcasts, then please do tell us and we'll get back to you. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to episode 3 of The Compliance Experts, and we'll come back to you soon with a stimulating and interesting topic. Take care. Remember to ask people twice how they are, and that includes when you get home. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Compliance Experts podcast. We highly value your input and welcome any questions, thoughts or challenges for us to tackle in forthcoming episodes. Varton Consultancy pride themselves in helping customers manage risk and subsequently helping them improve their overall company performance. To speak to Miles and his team, visit vartonconsultancy.com. This podcast is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk and is the copyright of Varton Consultancy. This podcast is created for entertainment purposes only. Views and opinions are that of Varton Consultancy and their guests. Information recorded in this episode was deemed correct at the time of recording. However, we advise you to always check with Varton Consultancy for up-to-date information and legislation.